The Anomalous Artifacts Agency, or AAA as it is better known, is purely a work of fiction. There is not, never was, and never will be such an organization in the world because there is really no such things as anomalous artifacts, anomalous organisms, anomalous persons, or anomalous forces. At least, as far as I know anyway. The AAA is a creation of mine, Terry Polino, better known to all of you as Natural Juan. All rights reserved. I'm doing this because I'm worried some of you might get the hot idea that this stuff might actually be real, like what happened with Slender Man, and do horrible things in real life with my work as an excuse. TLDR. This is all just an elaborate joke. None of it is real. I will be very disappointed if some of you actually believe this. Anyway, here's a quick shout out to Mr. Jonathan Green, a longtime supporter of this channel. Special mention as well for our sponsor Dermhaven with Miss Rochelle Pineda. Don't let your complexion burn to a crisp and let Dermhaven provide you with all the skincare that you need. We've been gone a while, but I think it's high time we got back to this story. So get ready and make sure you've got your favorite drink and maybe a small snack at your side. Things are going to heat up again as we learn more about the fake healer. So I went along with Tessa to the Fabian home with no real idea what to expect when we got there. That said, the moment I saw their home at a distance, I began to feel a sense of growing dread. It was in the mid-afternoon when we got there. The sun was still shining, but it was apparent that very soon it would begin its descent into the western horizon and darkness would again hold sway. Tessa informed me that very soon her mother and sister would be home and they might not appreciate me, an outsider, being there. I had to agree. In my mind, I thought that I would just look inside their home and confirm everything she had told me so far. I wanted to see with my own eyes first what was going on before deciding what I would do next. However, standing at their gate and looking at the condition of their once proud and clean home, I saw that something was very wrong indeed. Their front porch had fallen into disrepair, and the lamppost near their gate was missing a light bulb. This was very strange, as I knew that most homeowners were encouraged to light the front of their homes with lampposts. It was both to light the way for ordinary people walking the streets at night and discouraging crime. When I noticed this, Tessa informed me that they even once had a CCTV camera mounted on the wall. It was nowhere to be seen now, and only an empty camera mount was all that remained of it perched atop the wall. Tessa told me that it was just one of the many things that the light bringer insisted they dispose of, along with all other electronic devices they had in their home. I told her that CCTV cameras were only used as a kind of defense for a home. After all, few criminals would want to take a chance being recorded while committing crimes on camera. This Lightbringer character was putting them at risk and was being quite intrusive by asking them to remove one of their means of protection. Tessa sighed at this and shrugged. She told me that this was out of her hands, as this was what her mother and sister wanted, or rather what the Lightbringer wanted, and had both Megan and Jessie do. Deciding that we dallied enough at the gates of their house, we entered through the front porch of the Fabian home. From the steps leading up to their house, I could already sense something awful radiating from it. I couldn't see the interior of the house yet, but just looking at its exterior made me very uncomfortable. As I looked at a window obscured by a thick curtain, I felt as if something was looking at me from inside, even if Tessa insisted that their house would be empty at this time, except for us. Tessa shook her head and insisted that there was no one else in the house, at least as far as she knew. There were, after all, the apparitions she sometimes saw, and there was no way of telling whether they were real or not. The moment Tessa opened the door, I was almost knocked off my feet by the sheer stench of the place. If there was ever a smell that could make you feel like you were punched in the face, the interior of the Fabian home was definitely it. A mix of burnt flesh and raw sewage, I was nearly overpowered by the awful odor that wafted out of the house. Now, I do have experience with cleaning toilets. And yes, I've cleaned out some toilets at the Starside Hotel that I would never speak of again. However, at that moment, I couldn't imagine anything worse than what I smelled in the Fabian home. I had to struggle just to keep my lunch down as it threatened to leap out of my throat. Luckily, I had a few disposable face masks in my pocket which I immediately put on to avoid further issues. It didn't block out the stench altogether as I hoped, but it was enough to keep it at a more or less tolerable level. It was then that I looked around the entrance to the Tessa home, or, based on what she had said so far, former home, and really saw what had happened inside. As Tessa had said, the place was festooned with lots of candles, and I mean lots and lots of candles. Some had already melted to a mere puddle of wax where they were placed, and there were a few that still stood tall and unconsumed. Most, though, were only halfway done, their white flames still blazing. And yes, the white flames, just as Tessa had said before she had me come here. They were strange indeed. They flickered and danced this way and that like any normal fire, but they were speckled or spotted. It was like seeing flames with polka dot patterns which somewhat resembled the pockmarked skin of a strawberry. However, these were not as sweet and innocent as strawberries. That was for sure. The pockmarks or holes, if they could be called that, gave the candle flames an odd and, I don't know if I'm using the term correctly, unclean feel. It was like looking at flesh that was leprous or decaying. This only added to my nausea, which was already heightened due to the smell. Worse still, the little spots in the fire seemed to swell and shrink as if they were somehow breathing with the fire. As I looked at the burning candles, I felt myself drawn to the flames, especially the spots that appeared in them. It was only when Tessa nudged me that I snapped out of my reverie, or, dare I say it, hypnosis. I looked at the young woman, grateful for her intervention, even though she probably didn't know it at the time. The truth was, I felt I was almost overtaken by the strange, shifting fires and their many speckles. Tessa pulled me away, and I fully understood what had just happened. I put on my protective goggles and hoped they would help shield me from the hypnotic effect of the flames. Much to my surprise, they did, although just enough not to draw my full attention. As I got a slightly less distracted look at the Fabian home, I finally saw what Tessa was talking about. Flies. The things she referred to as gore flies. Large flies that were red and black in color. They looked like moving pellets of dung or capsules of burnt flesh. They buzzed and perched this way and that. As a janitor, I've had to deal with many types of pests and vermin before. I have learned not to flinch at the sight of spiders, rats, and cockroaches. I've even had to deal with a guest's escaped pet monitor lizard once, and what a harrowing adventure that turned out to be. So take my word for it that I'm not a squeamish guy. You can't be squeamish in my line of work after all. However now, I nearly jumped back in horror and disgust at the sight and touch of the enormous red and black flies. They felt less like ordinary insects and more like the living manifestation of rot and decay. Even the buzzing noises they made were disconcerting, sounding more like a mechanical drone of some power tool than an insect's rapidly fluttering wings. I followed Tessa to their kitchen and found myself further disturbed by what I saw there. The table was also festooned with the strange candles with the white flames and surrounded by teeming numbers of gore flies. Unwashed plates and utensils lay scattered everywhere, with bits of food like rice, scraps of meat, and fish covering them. I asked Tessa when was the last time they washed the dishes, and she told me that they almost never did. The Lightbringer told them that everything else in their lives before had become only secondary. Their most important priority were the candles and the fire that they kept in their home. Tessa went into her room and I heard her curse under her breath as she seemed to be looking for something. I continued looking around the house and saw much of the same thing when I first entered. Candles with bright white flames everywhere, whose appearance and smell were supremely nauseating. Around them, of course, were the same disgusting gore flies, seeming to glow a bright, baleful red as the sun began to set and the home began to darken. There were more thuds, shuffles, and curses as Tessa continued to search for something in her room. I decided to join her there in case she might have needed help, but it seems I wasn't needed. She found the wireless speaker she had been looking for. In quick order, she connected it to her phone through a wireless signal and, almost immediately, began playing church music. I believe the first song she played was Here I Am, Lord, and just as quick was the change it brought to the ambience of the Fabian home. Tessa turned the music to full volume, and what I saw astounded me to my core. While there was almost no wind in the Fabian home thanks to the thick curtains draped over the windows, the flame shrunk incredibly, plunging the house into a surprisingly comfortable darkness. I remember that, after joining the Insurmountables, the Italian angel Arcangelo told me that not all darkness is a representation of evil. The gloom that covered the Fabian home was just such a darkness, I suppose, as the oppressive white light of the candles were momentarily dimmed. The stench wafting from the candles weakened, and I found myself breathing somewhat easier and able to remove my mask without gagging at the odor. The flames on the candles were reduced to mere motes, and I could clearly see despite it being somewhat dark. The sun had not completely set yet, and it provided me with, dare I say it, more wholesome illumination, even if it wasn't much. Tessa told me that this was how she managed to survive with most of her sanity intact ever since her mother and sister were indoctrinated by the Lightbringer. She told me that her faith in her religion was bolstered by the knowledge it somehow weakened whatever influence the so-called faith healer had on her. It was just all too bad that the Lightbringer's hold on the rest of her family was stronger, as they continued to be enslaved to it. It got to the point that they made her stop playing church music with the threat of violence. Just then, we heard the sound of a car's engine, and, suddenly, heavy knocks came at the door, followed by loud shouts from the outside. Jessie and Megan, Tessa's mother and older sister, had arrived.